My name is Diane. I'm 58 years old, and life has been a slow unraveling of what once seemed perfect. I've spent most of my days taking care of the house, keeping everything running smoothly, raising two children, and living quietly in the little world Gerald and I built for ourselves. Our house, our home, was everything to us. It was more than just a building. It was the culmination of 2 decades of labor, sweat, and countless dreams. Gerald and I started building it from scratch when we were in our early 30s. At first, it was just the two of us, late nights under a single light bulb, measuring walls, laying bricks, dreaming of what each room would look like once it was finished. Those were the days when we laughed together, when we talked for hours about everything and nothing. Gerald was a steady man, always practical, always certain. He knew how to make things happen, and I trusted him completely. The house wasn't just a house to us, it was a testament to our love, our hard work. We built it slowly, room by room, year by year. The kitchen we spent so many weekends painting, the living room where we put in the hardwood floors ourselves, the back porch we finished just before our daughter, Claire, left for college. It all held memories of our life together. But over the years, things started to change. I noticed the distance between us, the growing silence. He wasn't the same man I married. Gerald, once the man I could confide in, had become more distant, more absorbed in his work and the things that only seemed to matter to him. The touch that used to be there, the affectionate glances, gone. I tried to talk to him, to ask if something was wrong, but he would always brush me off, saying he was just tired or too busy. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to become one of those women who nags her husband, so I kept my concerns to myself. I still cooked dinner every night, still kept the house clean, still tried to do the things I thought might bring us closer. But no matter what I did, Gerald remained distant. He was the one who handled the finances after all. He'd always managed the bills, the investments, and the paperwork. He'd say, "It's my role, Diane. You've got enough on your plate already." I trusted him. After all, he had been reliable for years. He had taken care of everything, so I didn't question it. But lately, I'd started to feel uneasy. I couldn't exactly put my finger on it, but it was there, like a low hum in the background, a quiet warning I couldn't ignore. Something had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that there were things going on in his life that I wasn't aware of. It wasn't just his coldness, it was the way he handled the finances now, the way he spoke about our house with a certain detachment, as if it was just another piece of property to him. Then, one morning, he came to me with a stack of papers. "Just refinancing," he said, his voice a little too casual. "Interest rates are good right now, Diane. It'll save us a lot of money in the long run." He had that look in his eyes, the one he used to get when he was trying to sell me on an idea he knew I'd be reluctant to buy into. Gerald had always been the one to make the big decisions, and I'd always gone along with it. This time, though, something felt off. I studied the papers for a moment, but they were filled with legal jargon, terms and conditions I didn't fully understand. "Just trust me," he said, his eyes shifting nervously as he handed me the pen. "It's nothing big. Just sign, and we'll be done." He was in a hurry, as always. His tone was insistent, but not quite desperate, more like he was trying to avoid a confrontation. I could feel the pressure in the air, thick and uncomfortable, but I didn't want to question him. I didn't want to seem paranoid or distrustful. But then, just as I reached for the pen, I remembered something. A few months ago, my grandson, Adam, had given me a gift, a small, sleek pen with a hidden camera inside. He'd told me it was just in case, though at the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Adam was always thinking ahead, always one step ahead of everyone else. He had a knack for gadgets, and I suppose he'd gotten it from his father, my son. I smiled at the memory, then glanced up at Gerald, who was already turning away, his mind clearly elsewhere. I took the pen from the desk and clicked the small button hidden in the clip. The camera activated silently. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to accuse him of anything outright, but there was a gnawing feeling in my gut that told me I wasn't just signing a refinancing document. I signed the papers. It was all too easy. He watched me, not even glancing at the papers in my hands as I scribbled my signature. Then he gathered the papers quickly, shoved them in an envelope, and disappeared into his study without a word. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was looking for something that wasn't there. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something wasn't right about him, and something wasn't right about the way he'd handled this. I had no idea that the simple act of signing those papers with a hidden camera would be the key to everything. But in that moment, I had no idea what I had just done, what I had just set in motion. That would come a week later. A week passed. The silence between Gerald and I had deepened in those 7 days. He'd been coming home later, always with some excuse, work, meetings, important things that kept him from being present. I barely saw him anymore, and when I did, he was distant, withdrawn. He no longer seemed like the man I had built a life with, but it wasn't just the emotional distance that bothered me. It was something more. There was an underlying tension, like the calm before a storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The last time we had dinner together, he barely said a word. He ate quickly and excused himself, as if he couldn't wait to leave. I spent most of that evening pacing the living room, trying to push away the feeling of unease that had been nagging at me for days. When I went to bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the tree outside stretching across the wall. It was then that I realized I hadn't heard from him in hours. That night, I decided to call his office. It wasn't like him to be out of touch for so long. Maybe there had been an emergency or something that I didn't know about. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and waited for someone to pick up. "Gerald Taylor?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, a soft voice responded, "Sorry, Mrs. Taylor. We haven't seen Gerald today. He didn't come in this morning, and he hasn't called in to let us know anything." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't like him at all. Gerald was always punctual, always organized. There was no way he would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. I hung up the phone and dialed his cell number, hoping for some kind of explanation, some sign that he was okay. The phone rang and rang, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message telling him I was worried and asking him to call me back as soon as possible. The hours passed. Still, no word from Gerald. By morning, I was frantic. I called his friends, his colleagues, anyone who might know where he was. No one had heard from him. His phone was still off. I felt a wave of panic wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to do something. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I got a call from the bank. The voice on the other end was cold, detached. "Mrs. Taylor," the woman said, "I'm calling regarding your property. We've processed the sale of the house." I froze. My mind couldn't grasp what I was hearing. The sale? Of the house? "Excuse me?" I managed to say, my voice trembling. "What do you mean? What sale?" "According to our records, your husband, Gerald Taylor, authorized the sale of the property last week. You were listed as a notified party, and the transaction has been completed." I felt the blood drain from my face. I was listed as a notified party? What did that even mean? I hadn't signed anything to sell the house. This was impossible. I demanded to speak with someone else, but the woman on the other end was firm. She explained that everything had been handled according to the documents my husband submitted. She also mentioned that the funds had been transferred to a new account, which had been set up in Gerald's name. I hung up in a daze. My thoughts were racing, but they couldn't keep up with the horror that was sinking in. Gerald had sold our home, the one we'd spent decades building. He'd sold the place that had been our sanctuary, the place where our children had grown up, where we'd created a lifetime of memories. I felt sick to my stomach. It didn't make sense. Why would Gerald do this? And why hadn't he told me? I tried to focus to gather my thoughts. Something was horribly wrong, and I had to figure out what had happened. I grabbed my purse and drove straight to the bank. I needed answers. When I arrived, I demanded to speak with the manager, someone who could explain what had happened. The manager was a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and professional. She confirmed the sale and handed me a copy of the transaction details. There, in black and white, was my name, listed as a notified party. But there was something else, a clause that I hadn't seen before, buried deep within the fine print. It gave Gerald the right to sell the property without my consent. Is this normal? I asked, my voice low. Is this a standard procedure? The manager hesitated before answering. It's not typical, Mrs. Taylor. Normally, both parties need to sign off on such a transaction. But in this case, the paperwork you signed earlier must have been part of an agreement that allowed your husband to proceed without you. I felt the blood rush to my face. The paperwork I had signed? The refinancing papers? But I had never agreed to any sale. I left the bank in a haze, my mind reeling. How had Gerald managed to do this without me knowing? What had he signed? And why hadn't he even mentioned the house sale to me? I went home, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. I had to find some answers, something that would explain how all of this had happened. And then it hit me. The pen. The camera pen. I rushed to my desk and grabbed the small, inconspicuous pen that Adam had given me. My hands shook as I clicked the button to activate the hidden camera. I had only signed the papers a week ago, but I wasn't sure if the video would even be useful. Still, I had to check. I plugged the pen into my laptop, my heart pounding as I opened the video file. The first thing I saw was Gerald's face, lean and serious, just as he had been when he handed me the papers. He was sitting across from me at the desk, looking at the papers as I signed them. "Down here, just sign it," he said in the video, his voice smooth and calm. "It's necessary for the bank, nothing important." I watched as I signed the papers, as he quickly gathered them, just as he had in real life. And then I saw it, the last piece of the puzzle. The document I had signed wasn't just a loan agreement. It was a document granting Gerald full authority to sell the house without my consent. I froze. I had signed away my home, my sanctuary, without even knowing it, and Gerald had known exactly what he was doing. But he didn't know what I knew. He didn't know that I had a hidden camera. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen, unable to process what I had just seen. The truth was clear now. Gerald had orchestrated everything. He had planned this from the start. He'd waited for a time when I was too distracted, too trusting, to notice the hidden clause buried in the paperwork. I had no idea how far he had gone to hide his intentions, but I knew one thing now. He had sold our house without my knowledge, without my permission. And even worse, I had unwittingly signed the document that allowed him to do so. But that wasn't all. There was something else in the video, something I hadn't expected. The cold, calculated way he spoke to me. "It's necessary for the bank, nothing important," he had said. It was as if he didn't care that I was about to lose everything. It was as if he was already planning to disappear. I snapped out of my daze and reached for my phone. I needed to act fast. I had a plan forming in my mind. something that would put all of this into motion and hopefully bring Gerald to justice. The first call I made was to a lawyer, someone I could trust. I had worked with him before on smaller matters, and I knew he would be able to help me navigate this mess. His name was Mark, and he had a reputation for being thorough and strategic. Diane, Mark answered after the first ring. His voice was warm but professional. What's going on? You sound urgent. I need your help, Mark, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Gerald has sold our house. I don't know how he managed it, but I signed papers a week ago, and now the house is gone. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. Wait, did he forge your signature? No, I replied quickly. I signed. But he tricked me. He had me sign papers that I didn't fully understand. There was a clause in there that gave him the right to sell the house without me. Do you have the documents? Mark asked. Can you bring them to me? I have something better, I said, holding up the pen in my hand. I have video evidence of him tricking me into signing the papers. He didn't know the pen had a camera in it. There was a long pause. That's incredible. Diane, you might have just made things a whole lot easier. We'll need to see the video, and we need to act quickly. If what you're telling me is true, Gerald is about to find himself in a world of legal trouble. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. I still didn't know where Gerald was. I had no idea if he was coming back or if he was already long gone. But one thing was clear. I was no longer the passive bystander in this situation. I was going to make sure Gerald faced the consequences of his actions. I'll be there in an hour, I said, ending the call. When I arrived at Mark's office, I handed him the camera pen. He plugged it into his computer, and we watched the video together. As we saw the moment Gerald told me to sign and then quickly swept the papers away, Mark's face grew darker with each passing second. This is the smoking gun, Mark muttered. You've got him. I nodded, my stomach churning. So, what now? We need to get a hold of the sale agreement, the transaction records, everything we can. We'll file a legal complaint immediately. You've got a solid case for fraud and forgeries, and with this video, Gerald is going to have a hard time getting out of it. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. The truth was finally coming to light, but I still had to face the reality that I had been duped by the person I trusted most. But Mark, I hesitated, I still don't know where he is. He's disappeared, and I'm starting to wonder if he's already skipped town with the money. That's a concern, but we'll track him down, he reassured me. Let me make some calls to the authorities. We'll put a trace on him. By the time I left Mark's office, I was exhausted, but there was a spark of hope. Gerald's betrayal wasn't going to go unpunished. My home would be mine again. I wasn't sure how long it would take to untangle everything, but I had the evidence, and now I had the law on my side. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and paperwork. Mark worked tirelessly, sending out legal notices to the buyer, to the bank, and to anyone involved in the transaction. Meanwhile, I kept the camera pen with me, just in case. I felt like I was always one step behind, but with every passing day, I was moving closer to the truth. The buyer of our house was another challenge altogether. From what I could gather, he seemed unaware of the fraud that had taken place. When Mark contacted him, he seemed genuinely surprised and upset to hear about the situation. I paid good money for that house, the buyer told Mark on the phone. I thought everything was legitimate. I don't want any trouble, but if there's something wrong with the sale, I want to be part of fixing it. Mark reassured him that the sale would be undone, that he would be refunded, and that the property would be returned to its rightful owners. I wasn't interested in any compensation from the buyer. My focus was always on Gerald and on getting back the life he had stolen from me. It was 2 weeks before we had the full picture. The authorities had traced Gerald's movements to a remote cabin in the woods. But by the time they arrived, he was gone. It was clear he had planned his escape carefully. But what he didn't plan was me. I had been patient, calm, and thorough. And now, with the legal team on my side and the video evidence in hand, I had all the power I needed to take back control. Gerald had underestimated me, and he was about to learn that when you play dirty, you get caught. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Gerald's disappearance, and I was getting impatient. Despite all the legal actions we'd taken and the pressure we'd applied, there was still no sign of him. The authorities had followed every lead, but it seemed as if he had vanished without a trace. No more calls, no more texts, no more explanations. But I wasn't giving up. Not now. Not after everything he'd put me through. Mark had been working tirelessly on my behalf, and every step of the way, he kept me updated. I spent my days in a haze of paperwork, meetings with him, and planning my next move. The house, the home we had built together, brick by brick, was still mine. The legal actions against Gerald had put a hold on the sale, and the buyer, though frustrated, understood that the deal was under investigation. He had been cooperative and patient, thankfully, but even more pressing was the issue of Gerald's sudden and unexplained disappearance. One morning, I woke up to a message from Mark. It was simple, but it sent a shock of adrenaline through my veins. "Diane, I have news." I picked up the phone and called him immediately. The connection crackled, and Mark's voice came through, steady but serious. "I found him," Mark said. "Gerald's been living under an alias. The authorities traced his bank accounts. He's been making withdrawals from a small account in the Cayman Islands." My heart skipped a beat. Cayman Islands? What's he doing there? That's just the beginning. He's also been moving large sums of money into various accounts. But we've found something else, something that's going to bury him. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "What is it?" "There's a paper trail. Gerald didn't just sell the house. He sold other properties, all under his name, and all without you knowing. He's been siphoning money from joint accounts, transferring assets into his personal accounts. This wasn't just a one-time thing. It's been going on for years." I sat back, my mind racing. "So he's been planning this for a long time." "That's right," Mark said. "This wasn't just about the house. This was about everything. He's been laundering money, making deals, and lying to you all along." I felt sick to my stomach. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had been living a double life. For all I knew, he'd never been the man I thought he was. I had been his partner in building a life, but all along, he had been working behind my back, setting up escape routes, making sure he had a way out. "Well, what now?" I asked, my voice tinged with both determination and disbelief. "We move forward. We have him cornered now. The authorities are going to issue a warrant for his arrest. But in the meantime, we need to finish what we started. You'll be getting the house back, and everything else he took from you, well, that's going to cost him." The next few days were a whirlwind. The legal proceedings against Gerald escalated quickly. With the evidence from the video, the transaction records, and the new discoveries from the authorities, his case was airtight. His financial dealings were exposed, his fraudulent actions undeniable. It became clear that he had intended to disappear with everything he had stolen. But his plans were crumbling around him. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction with each update I received. As difficult as it was to accept that Gerald had betrayed me on such a monumental scale, there was a quiet sense of justice in knowing that he was going to pay for what he had done. And then it happened. I received the call that I had been waiting for. It was from the authorities. "Diane," the officer said, "we've apprehended Gerald." The weight that lifted off my chest in that moment was indescribable. The man who had so effortlessly turned my world upside down was finally being held accountable. The authorities had caught up with him in a small town, and he was being processed for his crimes. "He's not going anywhere," the officer assured me. "We've got him." I didn't feel victorious, not in the way I expected. I had imagined the moment when Gerald was caught would bring me a sense of relief, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. I had spent so many years building a life with this man, and now all of it was in ruins. The house was mine again, yes, but it felt different now. The walls that once represented love and partnership now seemed to mock me. The buyer was refunded as promised. The house, the one place I had once thought of as our sanctuary, was once again just a house. I had every legal right to stay there, but I knew it was time to move on. It wasn't just about the property anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. I began the process of putting things back in order. I contacted a trusted contractor to make some renovations to the house. I wanted to change things up, to make it feel like my own, without the ghosts of what had come before. It was a slow process, but with every change, I felt a little more in control of my own future. Weeks passed, and as Gerald's trial date approached, I kept my distance from the proceedings. I didn't need to be there in the courtroom. Everything was already laid out before the judge. Gerald's lawyers were trying to negotiate a plea, but the evidence was overwhelming. His life, the one he had built on lies and deceit, was crumbling faster than he could ever have imagined. I had my moment of justice, but it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace, about reclaiming what had been taken from me, not just the house, but my trust, my stability, my sense of self. I had been broken, but I was rebuilding myself, stronger than before. And as I sat on the porch of the house we had once built together, watching the sunset, I knew one thing for sure. Gerald had underestimated me, but in the end, it was him who had lost everything, and me who had gained back my life. The pen with the hidden camera had been my lifeline, but it was my resilience, my determination that had seen me through. And as long as I kept my eyes open, I knew I would never fall for another trick again. The days stretched on, and the slow process of rebuilding continued. The trial for Gerald was set to start in a few weeks, but by then, I had already learned more than I ever needed to know about betrayal and deceit. I'd spent enough time analyzing the past, and now it was time to look toward the future. Every morning, I woke up early, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The house was quiet now, with no one but me inside. The rooms were still filled with echoes of the past, the laughter, the arguments, the moments we had shared together. But those echoes no longer haunted me. They had become memories, not chains. My lawyer, Mark, kept me updated on the case. As expected, Gerald's defense team had tried to bargain their way out of his charges. They offered a plea deal, but it was clear Gerald had nowhere to hide. His financial records spoke for themselves. There was no way to deny his guilt. Gerald's greed had finally caught up with him, and he was facing serious prison time for fraud, embezzlement, and, of course, the illegal sale of our house. When the trial date arrived, I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The video footage from the pen had done its job. The authorities had everything they needed. Instead, I spent the day organizing the house, repainting the kitchen, rearranging the furniture. I wanted the space to reflect the new life I was creating, not the one Gerald had tried to control. The papers were finalized. The house was officially mine. The deed was signed, the final mortgage payments made, and the bank's involvement was now just a distant memory. I felt free, free from the weight of Gerald's deception, free from the anxiety of not knowing what would happen next. One morning, Mark called with good news. "The sentencing is done," he said. "Gerald's been convicted. They've given him the maximum sentence, 10 years in prison. No chance for parole." A strange sense of calm washed over me. I wasn't happy about his fate, but I wasn't angry either. It was over. Gerald had made his choices, and now he would have to live with them. He'd tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I had taken back more than just the house. I had taken back my life. The following months were transformative. I sold some of the things Gerald had collected over the years: furniture, artwork, old collectibles. They no longer held sentimental value for me. I used the proceeds to pay off the remaining debt on the house and started investing in a few projects I had always dreamed of. I enrolled in an online interior design course, something I had always wanted to pursue but never had the time for. I traveled. I reconnected with old friends. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself and no one else. Gerald was a distant thought now. Every so often, I would hear his name in the news, and each time I felt a small flicker of satisfaction. But I had long since moved on. He was a chapter in my life that I had closed, and the pages of that chapter were turning into dust. The more I focused on myself, the more I realized how much I had neglected my own needs and desires while I had been focused on him. I stayed in touch with Mark, though, mostly to make sure Gerald's legal matters were fully resolved. Mark had become more than just a lawyer to me. He was a friend. He supported me when I needed someone to talk to, and he was there when I needed advice. Then, one day, something happened that I hadn't expected. I was sitting at my kitchen table, working on a new design for a small boutique, when my phone rang. It was a local number, unfamiliar. I hesitated before picking it up. "Hello? Diane?" a woman's voice asked. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. This is Amanda. I'm Gerald's sister." I froze. The last thing I ever expected was to hear from anyone in his family. I didn't even know if they knew what he had done to me, and quite frankly, I didn't care. But curiosity got the better of me. "Yes, this is Diane," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for everything that happened," Amanda said, her voice sincere. "I don't know if you ever cared for Gerald, but I know he wasn't always the best brother, but he wasn't a bad person, not at heart. I don't want to excuse what he did, but I thought you should know that not everyone in his family was like him." I stayed silent for a moment, taking in her words. It was unexpected. For a split second, I almost felt sympathy for her, for his family, for the people who were now left to pick up the pieces of his mess. But then I reminded myself of all the things he had done, all the lies, the manipulations, the deceit. "I'm sorry, Amanda," I said softly. "I appreciate your call, but everything's over now. I've moved on." And with that, I ended the conversation. That evening, as I sat in the newly renovated living room, looking out the window at the calm evening sky, I realized something important. I had learned to protect myself, not just legally, but emotionally. The camera pen had been my tool of defense, but my resilience had been the true weapon. I had taken control of my life, my future. I was no longer the woman who had been deceived and trapped by Gerald's lies. I was Diane, and I was free. And as I sat there, the house finally felt like home again. The fox may have knocked, but the door was locked, and I knew I was ready for whatever came next.